Now I'm here to talk about what people consider probably would have been in fourth place in the documentary race. I Am Not Your Negro. Yes, I know. The title of the documentary sounds way too serious, especially with the word Negro on it. But it's the safest way for white people to say, instead of saying the other thing that only African Americans can say. The film is directed by Roel Peck, and this is based on an unfinished manuscript project by James Baldwin called Remember This House. And unfortunately, he didn't able to get it published. But now with this film, this actually tells the entire project on what Baldwin wanted to do. Now this explores the history of racism in the United States, and this is actually from the perspective of Baldwin himself, of what he sees in his own eyes. And of course to some of his close friends that were assassinated. Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr., all three civil rights leaders that were all assassinated. Now, I was actually very interested in seeing this documentary, not just because of the title, but how it looks at a different perspective on a different civil rights leader, specifically a writer. Now, Baldwin is usually a person that likes to live in Paris, or somewhere around France specifically. But then, of course, he had came back to the United States during the Civil Rights Movement to do this. And of course, he, Medgar, Malcolm, and Martin Luther have a lot of different things in perspective. But not also it shows some very interesting clips that I had never seen before, especially like some of the things from Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King's like assassination or funeral, specifically. But it also has some clips of Baldwin's appearance in the Dick Cavett Show. Now, what Baldwin's belief is that he doesn't see himself as a Negro like all of them, which he feels like that he has a different belief on all of his closest friends. That would be something we'll talk about in O.J. Made in America. Now, since this is the perspective of Baldwin, you need to hear like what he's saying. And Samuel Jackson is narrating the words of Baldwin here. Now, for Jackson's performance here, Jackson's narration, I should say, not performance, it's alright. Not a fantastic person to narrate this, but I think he really wanted to do this. I didn't watch his interview on Jimmy Kimmel about this documentary, but I might be interested in why he got into this project. Now, I was a little bit disappointed that there were not much exclusive footages, like never before seen footages of some of the big name assassinations like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. But this is about James Baldwin, not the other civil rights leaders, even though they're close of his friends. But Baldwin's one very interesting civil rights person that a lot of people are very kind of concerned. Not just because he's homosexual, that's what it was, but he didn't reveal that much during his time. Especially since there were other big subjects other than LGBT things, unlike today, which is now kind of fixed in the modern era. Now this documentary, I have to say, is pretty good. Not fantastic by all means, but it does really show of a different perspective of an actual civil rights writer. Now there are of course a couple things I think that should not be, most specifically in the ending, when you just see the crew members, including Raul, his brother Haber Peck, and some other of the African American members that worked on this film, I didn't think was not necessary for the film, even though they did make the movie, and it kind of makes sense with Baldwin's words. That they were also in the trailer as well, but I didn't think it did not make much sense here. But I did like how it went through, based on the entire line of what Baldwin was saying. And I even loved the sounds of the typewriters during the beginning of the subjects, because that's what it was back then. People used typewriters instead of today with computers or laptops or even their iPhones or iPads or whatever. Nice to hear a great sound of a typewriter. So this documentary, I thought it was okay. Not great, but it is still an enjoyable documentary to see. Now, for my recommendations for this film, definitely a recommendation for, like, a specific history class, but you would think it would be for history class. I actually say this would be more for an English class. Now, even though it's more of a civil rights thing, but if you're going to be looking at civil rights writing or reading during around that era, this is a one great exception for this, because this actually focuses on a civil rights writer. So, and if you are a person that is really interested in seeing a different perspective of somebody other than Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr., this is a great film to see from a different perspective from a big civil rights leader, and that is James Baldwin. So with that, We're now 2 down. Next up, we're going to be traveling to Lampedusa, Italy for our next review, Fire at Sea.